Scotland, 1320. Robert I, the King of Scotland, also known as Robert the Bruce, has been crowned for 14 years. However, his fledgling country is floundering in the water. They can't get the recognition they need due to Robert I's excommunication from the Roman Catholic Church. The country is in a political and economical crisis with no clear way out. So how did Scotland get to this point? Let's go back to 1314, just 6 years prior. The English-occupied Scotland fights desperately for their freedom, as they take castle after castle under the leadership of one Robert the Bruce. This power struggle has been going on since 1296, when King Edward I of England took advantage of a succession mix-up to crown himself the de facto King of Scotland. Needless to say, the Scots weren't very happy about this development. That's when one man rose up to lead the country against these people they saw as invaders. This man was William Wallace, better known as Braveheart. After Wallace's escape to France and eventual capture and execution, Robert the Bruce took up the torch as the protector of Scotland and led the people to victory. Everything came to a head at the Battle of Bannockburn. Things up to this point had been pretty quiet. The previous king, the aforementioned King Edward I, had died 7 years ago. His successor, the pampered Edward II, was not one for battles. However, this led to a reputation as a weak king, something that Edward couldn't let stand. After looking back at previous battles, he decided to pick up where his father had left off and finally put Scotland in their place. English troops were stationed at Stirling Castle, which was then under siege. Edward planned to relieve the soldiers and make a push up into the Scottish Highlands to finally quell the rebels once and for all. Robert the Bruce, hearing of the imminent attack, realized what this battle could mean. If Edward could be repulsed and not allowed to relieve the soldiers in Stirling, then Scotland would be his. So, Robert set up his armies right across the old Roman road where he knew Edward would have to come. The ensuing battle takes only 2 days, and yet its outcome changes the course of the country forever. It's an absolute slaughter, as the English are driven back so quickly that they trample their fellow countrymen. In the end, Edward barely managed to escape with his life, leaving the majority of his 18,000-man army dead on the field. This was a resounding victory for Robert, his king status, and Scotland as a whole. With this victory, Robert was left with complete control over Scotland. Fast forward 6 years to 1320. Robert I has been king over Scotland for 14 years now, and his grip is slipping. His younger brother that he had crowned King of Ireland had died in battle just 2 years ago, effectively pushing all Scottish influence out of Ireland. Robert was on bad terms with the Pope after killing a significant political rival in a church back in 1306. The Pope refuses to acknowledge Robert as the King of Scotland and blames him for attacking Edward II, and Robert knew that excommunication was likely to happen soon. Without the acknowledgement of the Pope, the newfound country of Scotland may not remain an independent country for long. None of the other nations in Europe will trade with them, and England is breathing down their necks, looking for any sign of weakness to attack and take back Scotland for themselves. This is the environment Robert found himself in, and so he did what he felt was one of his only options. He gathered all his nobles together in Arbroath Abbey and brainstormed up a document to send to the Pope with the help of current abbot Bernard of Linton. And so the Declaration of Arbroath was born. This document told the history of the Scots as a people, the troubles with the English, and their long-held Christian beliefs. The document was also a sort of constitution, as they were explaining to the Pope how their government would function. In it, they mentioned that, quote, if he, King Robert, should give up what he has begun, seeking to make us or our kingdom subject to the King of England or to the English, we would strive at once to drive him out as our enemy and a subverter of his own right and ours, and we would make some other man who was able to defend us our king. End quote. This marks one of the first appearances of the people rising up to overthrow a corrupt government, which was unheard of at the time. They essentially said that if King Robert I should go back on his promises and morals and try to join with the English, that the people would rise up and depose him, placing someone on the throne that would do as the people wanted. The Declaration also sports one of the most iconic lines in all of medieval text that goes as follows, quote, for as long as 100 of us remain alive, we will never on any condition be subjected to the lordship of the English. For it is not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we fight, but for freedom alone, which no good man gives up except with his life. End quote. Most historians believe that the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, was influenced in some part by the Declaration of Arbroath, and after hearing these lines, you can see why. The people are saying that they would rather fight and die for their freedom than live under English rule. Aside from these powerful lines, the declaration wraps up by asking the Pope to recognize them as their own country, make England stop attacking them, and makes promises that Scotland will help in the Crusades if the Pope will forgive Robert of his wrongdoings. When the Pope received this declaration, his heart was changed, and though it took another 4 years, he recognized Scotland as his own country for the first time. This was a monumental step forward for Scotland, and things seemed to be looking up for this fledgling country. However, fate had other plans for Scotland. For the next 9 years, King Robert I of Scotland rules with little to no opposition. Scotland prospered, and Robert has his first male child, named David, in 1324. The Pope sets up peace talks between Scotland and England, and a deal is reached in 1328, where Robert's then 4-year-old son David is married to Edward II's 6-year-old daughter, Joan. Unfortunately, even before his son's wedding, Robert had come down with a serious illness. Although it is not known what the illness was, what is known is the result of it, the death of Robert the Bruce. He died in the summer of 1329, satisfied knowing that he had accomplished all that he had set out to do. Yet it was not meant to last. Robert's death left a power vacuum, as the 5-year-old King David could not lead the country. People that had been vying for the kingship throughout the years started reappearing, and pretty soon the country was in the same sort of struggle as it was back in 1296. The English again stepped in with their own candidate, named Edward Balliol, who ended up taking over a significant portion of the country. Supporters of King David are all but wiped out, and the child has to flee to France for safety. The peace treaty falls apart as England starts ransacking Scotland again, this time much more successfully. And so we see the triumph and the tragedy that was the Declaration of Arbroath. Although a shining example of what a country could be centuries ahead of the rest of the world, that was not enough to keep Scotland independent for long, as it quickly fell back into wars and civil unrest. One can only hope that the people will see this tragic moment in history and learn from it, as to not repeat it themselves.